name is David Cobb. I'm a proud, I'm a patriotic, and these days I am a pissed off American citizen. Yeah, you can say that, and frankly, I think it's about time that we in the progressive community, the left, however we describe ourselves, we need to actually get in touch with our righteous indignation. And I, for one, especially following Emma's revolution, I'm kind of sick and tired of the Tea Party acting as if and claiming as if they have some sort of monopoly on righteousness, or for that matter, righteous indignation. Because I'll tell you something, I am pissed off about the corporate takeover of our government. I am pissed off about Wall Street America and the billions of our tax dollars that they get. I am pissed off about the big bankers, and or what I say, the banksters. You know, the mobsters who have basically hijacked our economy and our government. But I'll go even deeper than that. Because for me, what I realize, why I'm so pissed off, because I can remember what it was like to be a proud and patriotic American with no other qualifier. It was when I was a little boy, and I was taught and told that I was from the land of the free and the home of the brave. Not only that, but I was from a land of liberty and justice and equality. And not only that, but I was from a land that would bring liberty and justice and equality to all the rest of the world. I was told that we were like some great shining light on the hill, and all the rest of the world would look to us for help and assistance for liberty, justice, and equality, and that we would deliver it. And as a little boy, I was so proud to be from that country. I was so proud to be from a people like that. And when I grew up, I realized I had been lied to. And frankly, folks, I don't think that Mrs. Armstrong, my 5th grade teacher, I don't think she stayed up at night and went, "Wah!" I can't wait for those children to come into class. I'll fill their minds full of lies and propaganda. No! Mrs. Armstrong was a good woman. I remember her to this day. She was kind. She was loving. She was the kind of teacher that we all want on the day-to-day. You see, Mrs. Armstrong believed it. And you know what else? I believed it. And if you had either the good or bad fortune to attend public education in this country as a little child, you probably believed it too. And I'll tell you why we believed it. We believed it because we wanted to believe it. We want so desperately to be from a land of liberty and justice and equality. We want that. And so the creation myth, and that's what it is, the creation myth works because we want it to work. We want to believe that. And may I suggest something, sisters and brothers, that we want that to work not because we're Americans. And frankly, you don't want it to work because you're Mainers. And I know y'all got a lot of justified pride in being a Mainer. But you want that to work because you're a human being. And let me tell you something. Rwandan children want to be from a land of liberty, justice, and equality. Chilean children want to be from a land of liberty, justice, and equality. Finnish children want that. We all want that. These are human rights we're talking about. And can we please start talking about it that way? I'm sick and tired of hearing about American exceptionalism and American values. Yeah, we've got some stuff to be proud of about as Americans. Frankly, we've got some stuff to be deeply ashamed about as Americans too. Maybe I've got a leg up on you about handling both pride and shame at the same time. See, I'm from the South.
No.
I'm a white person from the South. I have had to come to terms with pride and shame at the same damn time. Right?
Right.
You know, so I suggest that we as Americans have got to do that as well. But even deeper, can we agree and admit and start to talk about these are human rights? And that liberty, justice, and equality are human conditions, and that we're going to commit to making that a human movement, a human rights movement. Yeah? Can I get that? All right. So, the creation myth I was lied to, I was angry about it. And as I grew up, I realized I was angry. But what I realized is, and I look around the room, I always like to check the age of the crowd, so I think I'm safe to say this. I've been able to accept that there's not a tooth fairy. I can get my head around no Easter bunny. And on the right day, under the right circumstance, if you approach me in the right manner, I'll entertain the possibility that maybe there's not a Santa Claus. But I'll tell you this, I'll be damned if I'm going to accept that the United States of America cannot be a functioning democracy. Because that is one lie that I was told as a creation myth that I dedicate my life to making real, to make it true, to make the promise of democracy a reality.
Bring it home, brother.
Yes, sir, brother. You can applaud that. You can applaud that, because here's the thing, y'all, and I'm dead serious about this. I declare this, I declare the Meg Perry Center for Peace and Justice a truth-telling zone. Yeah? We're going to tell the truth. I'm going to tell the truth to the best of my ability. And as Andre Lourdes reminds us, even if my voice quivers, I will tell the truth as I see it. And I invite you to do the same. And let's at least get some clarity about what's going on here so that we can figure out what the problem is, but more importantly, what we're going to do about it. Because here is the first truth that I need to say. Not only are we not from a land of liberty, justice, and equality, but the United States of America is not now, nor was it ever. In fact, it was not designed to be a functioning democracy. Now that's a hard truth for some people to hear, and those are our sisters and brothers in the Tea Party movement, and they are our sisters and brothers. They are oftentimes confused. Oftentimes they're dead on. Quite honestly, when I hear them talk about corporations and the big banks, I wonder where the progressive left is. Because they say it with a level of fever and furor that I wish some of my sisters and brothers on the left would use, right? So they're dead on sometimes. It's our job to help them see that it's not brown and black folks that are actually in charge of the big banks and the corporations that they're so angry about. That's a different story. We'll get to that. The point I'm making here, folks, is that there is a system in place. The United States is not now, nor has it ever been a functioning democracy. But here's another truth that hopefully will make us feel a little better about ourselves. Every great social movement in this country was at its core an effort to make this a more democratic country, to actually make this a more fair and just and compassionate society. And I mean everyone, from the creation of this country in the American Revolution, to the abolitionist movement, to the women's suffrage movement, to the trade union movement, to the civil rights movement, even the nascent environmental movement. And I do think it's only a nascent movement at this stage. But those movements, every one of them at its core is really a democracy movement. And frankly, I wish in the United States that I would hear more people talk about the democracy movement. And you know, we don't have one in this country. You know why I know that? Because nobody says that. I hear people talk about, I'm part of the women's movement. I hear people talk about, I'm part of the anti-war movement, or the peace movement, or the environmental movement, or the trade union movement. You know where in the world they talk about a democracy movement? The global south. Very specifically in Latin America. Soy de miembro de movimiento de democracia. I am a member of the democracy movement. And they talk like that. And frankly, folks, as North Americans, I am a North American, I can't assume that you all are, but as a North American, one thing I have come to know, I need to sit down and shut up and pay a lot more attention to what's going on in Latin America, because they know what time it is. They know what time it is. And they are so much further developed than we are, both in their analysis of the problem and also their solution. And can everybody say, hello, Hugo Chavez? Hello, Evo Morales? Hello, hello! Hola! Hello, Ecuadorian Constitution, where they have integrated rights of nature and the ecology into their constitution. I mean, they are so far ahead of us. And so I ask, how did it come to be? You know, I think that it's important, since this topic is supposed to be about corporate rule, building a movement to oppose and overcome corporate rule. If we're going to talk about corporate rule, because, by the way, another truth, corporations are not merely exercising power today. They are ruling us. As surely as kings once ruled their subjects, as surely as masters once ruled their slaves, unelected and unaccountable corporate CEOs are ruling us. And what do I mean? I mean they are making the fundamental public policy decisions that affect our lives. They are making the choices about what choices we have as it relates to transportation. They are framing and already deciding in advance what choices and options we'll have for health care. They are choosing for us what foods we'll have available to choose from at the grocery store. We are left to choose between Coke or Pepsi, paper or plastic, but in terms of actually creating the society that we want to live in, you know, actually having power, actually engaging in a democratic process, we never get those choices at all. Here's a quick pop quiz. How many of you are eating genetically mutated organisms on a daily basis?
Who knows?
Yeah, right? All the hands go up because you know already. Answer, we all are. You can't help it unless you grow all of your own food, I mean all of it, and never buy food from the commercial corporate distribution chain. You are almost surely eating genetically modified organisms. GMOs, genetically mutated organisms, maybe. How do I know that? Why? Because it's in our public food supply. So here's a pop quiz. A public decision, our public food supply, who made that decision? Was it we the people through our democratic process?
No.
Monsanto.
Monsanto Corporation.
Monsanto.
Archer Daniel Midland Corporation.
Yeah, Archer Daniel.
Cargill Corporation. The point is, these corporations and the corporate CEOs made a public decision, yet they made it and claimed that it was a private decision. So it was behind closed doors, corporate boardroom doors. We the people were not even allowed to know that it was being made. Much less did we not actively participate in making it. We didn't even know that those decisions were being made until after the fact. It had already been put in the food supply. And then the congressional hearings and even activists, us, engaged citizens, the big battle typically, label it. You know what they're saying in Latin America? Ban it. They're literally uprooting crops, right?
And in Europe it's banned.
In Europe it's banned. I mean, again, folks, like this American exceptionalism, to the extent that there's anything exceptional about it, it ain't so good. Right? I mean, really, our mindset and our ability to think about what's possible in this country is so damn low. So we can do that with issue after issue after issue after issue. We can recognize the extent to which we really don't have many mechanisms to actually participate in making these decisions. Now, that's not to say that there are not phenomenal organizing work that's being done outside of that box, and I want to applaud that, and we'll talk about what we can do about it. But let's acknowledge that the structure itself and most of the big NGOs, or most of the big ones like that, are always putting us into boxes that very rarely ask us to question, what is it that you really want? That's one of the reasons I love Veterans for Peace so much, because they are very clear. They're not like parsing timetables. End war as foreign policy. I'm for that. You know what I mean? Like, that's for peace. They got it right. As far as I'm concerned. So, here's the question. If I'm right about corporate rule, and I am. So, if I'm right about corporate rule, then the question is, does anybody know what language the word corporation comes from? Because let's actually identify this entity. Latin. And it's Latin, that's right. And by the way, it's because the first corporations ever created were actually created during the Roman Republic. Not the Roman Empire, but the Roman Republic. Wish we had time to delve into that. And I wonder if we could maybe get some lessons out of what happens when a growing republic turns into an empire. Flag that for self-reflection. But the Roman Republic, and I'm not going to, the Roman Republic had all sorts of problems to be sure, but the Roman Republic, the first time that corporations come into being, and somebody said, what does it mean? Body. But it's not just body, because that's corpus. Corporation is the state of having a body, or give body to. You know why? Check this out, because corporations, and this is what they teach us in law school. Any lawyers that are willing to admit or recovering lawyers? Am I the only one? I'll tell you, I remember with clarity, in law school, first year, they teach us corporations are a legal fiction. What does that mean? They don't really exist. But legally, we'll pretend like they exist. And watch this. Corporations don't really exist, but if we will all agree that it exists, presto, change-o, click, what happens? They exist! They're a construct. Stay with me on this. And we're going to talk about this construct. They are a construct. when we collectively all believe something or act like we believe something, we create reality, which is to say we can change reality. That's an important idea here, right? So corporations, though, in the Roman Republic, were used to amass private capital from individuals in order to create the road system. You know, all roads lead to Rome. That aqueduct system that moved water all over the Italian peninsula without any electricity. We're very clever. We Homo sapiens, as Homo sapiens go, we're pretty clever, right? They moved water all over the entire Italian peninsula with no electricity. The aqueduct system, corporations. The first universities, corporations. The first hospitals, corporations. How did they do it? They went to individual. Well, you're women, so sorry. This is important. Yes. So we'll go to our Roman citizen, a male Roman citizen, and say, "Sir, would you be willing to invest some of your private money into our effort to build a road?" And notice I'm not taxing him and forcing him to do it. Would you be willing to do it, sir? Well, you're going to get about. We're going to limit, by the way, how much your investment can be. You don't get to own the road, but if you invest, if you give me the money, we'll administer, we'll create this road, and then we'll repay it over time. It's really the functional equivalent of the first bonds. That's how corporation, and then we'll go to the next one. And check it out. Would you be willing to do it? No? He says no. That's all right. We're not going to force them. That was perfect. See, we go individual by individual, pool private money to create these things. Now, pop quiz. Somebody tell me what all of these have in common. And remember the words of Emma's Revolution. What do we got here? We got schools, we got roads, we got water system. What are they?
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure, but specifically what kind?
Public.
Public infrastructure. Stay with me. The use of the corporation, the creation of this idea, this construct, the first time it's created was only to do public good and to do public infrastructure. That's the history. All right, now, let's fast forward, because the non-transnational corporation doesn't exactly look like that, does it?
No.
So what's the genesis of the transnational corporation, we might ask, if we were clever? So let's ask it, shall we? The 13th, 14th, and 15th century of Europe. You know, the age of discovery, right? I have to put discovery in quotation marks because this is back to the creation myth of the United States. This is the myth of world history. It's the age of discovery. Of course, what were they discovering? Africa, Asia, later North and South America. Stop! There were people living in Africa, Asia, and North and South America. They were not lost. They did not need to be discovered. In fact, it's even worse than that. Because not only was it not the age of discovery, we know what it was. And don't you remember that we all agreed this was a truth-telling zone? So what's the truth? It was the age of rape and pillage and plunder and murder. That's what that age was. And we need to tell that truth unflinchingly. That is what the corporation, the transnational corporation, was designed to do. To literally steal the wealth out of Africa, Asia, later North and South America, and transfer that wealth to the monarchs, the sovereigns. And who was the sovereign at that time? The king and the queen, the monarchy. They were sovereigns. And sovereign just means who rules, who's in charge. Remember that. That's what sovereign means, right? So that's what the creation of the transnational corporation was. For example, the Dutch East Indies Corporation, one of the very early ones, specifically created in order to go to the Indonesian archipelago, and literally, they weren't looking for spice. They were stealing spice, right? Loading it up in their ships and taking it back. Another of the big early corporations, the Africa Trading Company. Does anybody want to hazard a guess what the Africa Trading Company traded? Say it again, sir, because this is the way we ought to say it. Human beings. Because to say they traded slaves is an abstraction, and it takes us away from the reality and the truth of it all. They traded human beings. And I want to tell you folks, and as a white person, I think it's important that we say this and understand this. They traded human beings that were biologically the functional equivalent of meat. Right? Stay with me here, because although they were African human beings, biologically, they were the exact equivalent of meat. Ask any scientist. race does not exist. Race does not exist. It too is a construct. I mean, skin pigment clearly exists. Hair color, well, who has hair? Hair color exists, right? Yeah, don't rub it in, Jeffrey. The balding gene exists. Eye color exists. And ethnicity exists, but race doesn't exist. That too is a construct. But hang on, watch this, white people. Race doesn't exist. Race doesn't exist, but racism does. Why? Why? Because we invented race. Because it's a construct. Because we're all going to pretend like skin pigment all of a sudden matters. Now, why are we doing that? Because the elites of the day, during about the 14th, 15th century, created it. But why would they do that? To justify the African slave trade and no other reason. Check it out. Check it out. Okay, Jeffrey, let's imagine that you and I live on the opposite sides of the river. That's all. We speak the same language. We look the same. We act the same. We have the same culture. But my tribe goes to war against your tribe. We win. I capture you. I put a spear to your neck and I say, you are my slave. Here's a pop quiz, folks. What is my legal, moral, ethical justification for enslaving Jeffrey? Say it again, brother. The spear and nothing more. Might makes right. I have captured you. Power over domination, that's the justification, right? Now watch this. That had existed for millennia before as a construct, that idea. The concept of race gets created for the first time in human history to justify the idea of enslaving somebody, whole groups of people, for no other reason than ignorance. Literally, race is created as a construct, and the Africa Trading Company and the transnational corporations were intimately involved in that. So let me tell you that the transnational corporations are not only fascist, and we'll get into that, they're also racist inherently. Right? They created that idea. And the reason that I talk about constructs so much is to recognize that constructs change. They are up for grabs. The elites will constantly try to tell us. Corporate media will constantly try to tell us. It's not the mainstream media. Stop talking about the mainstream media. It's the corporate media. Truth telling. Very important. The corporate media will constantly lie to us. Right? This is the way it is. It's the way it always has been. And it's the way that it always will be. Bullshit! There have been so many fundamental transformational changes that make our heads explode if we actually can ever go through a process of actually imagining how other people before us, people who were functionally just like us, DNA-wise, thought process-wise. The only thing that was different is the culture. They thought different things, therefore they acted differently, right? And so the transnational corporation is inherently involved in the creation of racism and race in order to justify the African slave trade. In addition, they were literally imperialist. The transnational corporation was specifically designed to facilitate empire. And empire or colonialism is rape, murder, and theft. And we just got to tell that truth. So, if that's true, and it is, then now let's actually fast forward to the United States of America, right? How many original colonies here? It's an easy one. And they're colonies, colonialization. Again, I wonder if there's any lessons to be thought about there from the very founding of this country. So the 13 original colonies, but how were they created? I mean, by the way, Massachusetts, was it Massachusetts before white people came?
Land grants from sovereigns in Europe.
They were land grants from the sovereigns. Who didn't own the land?
The American Indians.
And in fact, ma'am, Massachusetts was not originally even called the Massachusetts Commonwealth. It was called the Massachusetts Bay Colony.
Yes.
Right? Virginia was not the state of Virginia, it was the Virginia Company. It was the Rhode Island and Providence Plantation. Georgia was a penal colony. And check this out. Who operated, as a penal colony, who were the penitentiary members that were there? Why, white people from England who had suffered under the enclosure movement. You know, those white people who had actually lived for millennium off of the land, off of the meadows and the forests and the streams, and literally had lived in connection, rooted to a sense of place, more or less as indigenous people, right? We white people are also come out of indigenous roots. This enclosure movement kicked them off the land, excluded them from the land, and who did it? The sovereigns. And they either had to immediately become wage slaves in a growing mercantilist system that evolved very quickly into a corporatist system, or they found themselves in debtor's prison. And where might they often go? To Georgia or Australia as slaves, white slaves. I mean, like, that's the reality of it. And as the sister in the back pointed out, these were actually corporations created by land grants from the king. And by the way, the land grant would lead, I the sovereign, I the king, will grant to Roger the ability to plant, rule, and govern. That's what the original corporation said. This new place called the Massachusetts Bay Company, in my name. I'm the king, I'm still ultimately sovereign and in charge, but he will be the governor of this new corporation, which is to say the CEO, really, when you think about it that way, right? The CEO. And by the way, Massachusetts is another construct. It didn't exist before, and honestly, it doesn't really exist now. What exists are the rivers and the streams and the buildings. Like, physical reality exists there, and back then, the people, all of those things in physical reality existed, but Massachusetts is just a construct. It's just an idea, right? That's all it is. And the only reason that it has any meaning is because we all act like it has meaning. Boom, boom. See how often we're creating reality? Every moment of the day, we are creating reality. So Massachusetts doesn't really exist. The new governor, though, is we create this thing, lines on a map, arbitrary lines on a map. So, when you read the Declaration of Independence, and I recommend that people do so, when you read that document, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands, blah, 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 we hold these truths to be self-evident. That is to say, they are so obviously true that any fool can see. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, all people are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Inalienable meaning you cannot divest them. You cannot give them away if you wanted to, and nobody can take it away legitimately. Having a right is profound. So, that's the part of the Declaration that many of us are familiar with. But you know what most of that document is? Most of the document is a list of grievances, allegedly against King George III. But do you know what, if you go line by line, those grievances? Quartering troops without consent, requisitioning food and supplies without paying just compensation, taxation without representation, go down every one of them. And actually, who was the person doing that? The royal governor of the day. Stated another way, the American Revolution is not merely a rejection of monarchy as a form of rule, which is a big deal. It is that. You know what else it is? It's a people's uprising against unaccountable, illegitimate corporate power. And so, when we have our children enact the Boston Tea Party, you know, what are we celebrating and enacting? Why, the largest act of nonviolent civil disobedience that this country has ever seen, with property destruction worth tens of millions of dollars in today's era. And we do that. We celebrate that. I myself was Indian number 3 at Baycliff Elementary. First roll. I remember it well. And Timothy got to be Samuel Adams. But I was a proud Indian number 3. The point is that, you know, I used to say that the American revolutionaries were not calling for a more socially responsible king. And so today, we should not call for merely more socially responsible corporations. Right. Should think bigger. But check it out, folks. You know what? In the 1740s, 50s, and 60s, do you know what those people who had become revolutionaries were calling for? A more socially responsible king. And it goes like this. They were writing letters that went, "Oh dear dear Father King, we, your obedient and humble children, come before you on bended knee and ask that you intervene on our behalf, because Parliament and the royal governors are mightily oppressing us with unfair laws. And we, as good Englishmen, are entitled to your protection. And so, Father, we beseech you to intervene on our behalf. And in one generation, really like 10 to 20 years, that kind of sniveling, groveling, obsequious language went from that to get out. And by the way, why was the king sovereign? Where did the king get his power and authority?
God.
God! Hold on, folks.
Military.
You don't. You don't get more legitimate if you really believe, and the rest of society goes along with you, that your legitimacy comes from God. I'm going to do a thought experiment with y'all. Hang with me. This is always fun. At least it is for me. I'll see if y'all be willing to do it. Close your eyes. You don't have to close your eyes, but it would help if you do. Close your eyes and say this. David Cobb is the king. And as the king, he is God's representative on earth. So everything David says is the word of God and must be obeyed without question. David Cobb is the king. And as the king, he is God's representative on earth. And as God's representative, everything he says must be obeyed as if it was the word of God. David Cobb is the king. Okay, open your eyes. How many of you were able to get into that headspace? Folks, I could do that all day, and you're just going to get annoyed at me. Nobody's going to go there. And do you know why? Because it's nuts. I mean, that is beyond foolish, right? That's crazy talk. But hang with me. 500 years ago, 400 years ago, everybody basically believed that. And if they didn't believe it,
They believe in witches too.
if they didn't believe it, they needed to keep their mouth shut, right? And because they acted like it and believed it, boom, boom, reality. Again, the number of times that constructs, that people merely by thinking and acting a certain way, they create reality. So the divine right of kings, although we today acknowledge it to be, I mean, like, seriously, folks. I mean, like, nobody thinks that. I mean, I know right-wingers, I know socialists, I know anarchists, I know Marxists, I know Greens, I know Democrats, I know Republicans. Does anybody know an outright monarchist? Oh, God. All right, no.
Hawaii.
All right. Here in this country, does anybody say we need to pick a new king?
Not in Maine.
Not in Maine. I'm just pointing out, folks.
Texas to do, you know.
I'm just going to point this out. That is so discredited that nobody can really actually think that we want to actually have a monarchy and actually create a monarchy in Maine or the United States, right? So, the American revolutionaries threw the king out, but I want to really underscore this. As a nonviolent revolutionary myself, and I am a revolutionary, and I will say those words proudly, I am a revolutionary.
Me too.
Only I will say I'm a nonviolent revolutionary because I want it to be clear that I will not take up arms or engage in violence to create the revolution, because I genuinely believe that if you do a violent revolution, you will either create or you have planted the seeds for another power over dominating kind of society. And I know the world I want. A power with world, a cooperator world, a collaborating world. And you don't get that world violently. You can't, right? So I'm a non-violent revolutionary. But as a revolutionary, let me tell you something. I am keenly interested. I mean, I am focused like a laser beam in trying to understand what took people who were down on their knees, boot kissing, and in one generation to get up off their knees, to stand up, to put their shoulders back, chin up, stare down the king who got his authority where? From God, and then look behind the king and see the most powerful military the world had ever seen and say, "You're done." Man! Right? What is in the water? What are these people talking about about? What are they saying to each other? What are they doing that will make them do that? And by the way, what was the most powerful military the world had ever seen at that time? It wasn't just the British Empire. It was including the East India Corporation, which had more soldiers under arms and more sailors under arms than even the British Royal Navy did at the time. It was the fusion already of the corporate empire and the state. So when I talk about the transnational corporation and its roots and understanding history, hang on, folks. I mean, like, this history is profoundly important for us to understand how to get our way out of it. So the American revolutionaries throw out the king and throw out the transnational corporations and the East India Corporation, and they create a new government. Now, here's the thing. I wish that we had time to talk about the first government. Anybody know what the first government after the king went out was called?
Confederation.
The Articles of Confederacy, premised upon mostly the great law of the Iroquois Confederation.
Right.
And it was an eminently more democratic, fair system of government. But we don't have time to go into that, but I'll tell you this. It's worth studying a little bit. So what we're going to do is fast forward a little bit, because instead what gets created is the U.S. Constitution. That's what we're operating under today. So now I'm going to do my best to describe how it is that the U.S. Constitution operates. Because remember that the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land. This is the charter that actually creates our government. Just as the corporate charter actually creates the corporation, this document actually creates our new government. And by the way, who here has read the U.S. Constitution in the last year? A couple of hands going up. So grade my papers. I'm going to posit this, that there are basically two actors within the U.S. Constitution. The first actor actually is the first three words of that document. Anybody know it? We the people. And in fact, those are hallowed words in this country, are they not? The other great actor is actually what is created in this document is government. We the people and government. And in fact, in the constitutional framework, the word person or people are used almost 30 some odd times. You know how many times the word corporation is used? Zero! Not a single cotton picking time. Which might suggest to me that for those people who run around screaming, original intent! What did the founders have as the original intent? You know, those that I call people with a founder fetish? Founder fetishists? The founder fetishists, if they were principled at all, well, we would have to acknowledge that perhaps the founders did not expect the corporation to play any meaningful role in the body politic. How about that, Scalia, or Roberts, or Alito?
Jefferson was very afraid that would happen.
So we'll get to that.
Okay.
So we the people in government. Under this document, we the people are described as being free and sovereign. And by the way, let's remind you, what does the word sovereign mean? Who rules? Who rules? We the people rule. Government in this document is described as being subordinate and accountable. And government is subordinate to whom? The people. Government is accountable to whom? We the people. I like how that's going. It's got kind of a ring to it, doesn't it? We the people are free and sovereign. Government is subordinate and accountable. And under this document, we the people are described as having individual rights. In this document, government is described as having collective duties. And the difference between the individual and the collective and rights and duties is very profound for two reasons. One, well, what's the main one? In the whole Western concept of law, the difference between rights and duties is profound. If I have a right to do something, it means I can do it and I don't need anybody's permission. I don't need the city of Portland's permission. I don't need this group's permission. I don't need the state of Maine's permission. I don't need the U.S. government's permission. Hell, I'm from Texas. I don't need my mama's permission. Right? But if I can just do it, it means I can damn well do it. So to have a right is profound. Likewise, if I have a duty, let's say I have a duty to Brenda, a legal duty, it means I have to do it. which is to say, if I don't do it, Brenda can get the rest of society, including the military might of the police and the civil and the criminal justice system, to compel me to do my duty. It's a profound thing. Well, how is government going to do its duties? Remember this, under this framework, all political power, or at least all legitimate political power, resides with the people. We, the people, delegate a certain amount of power to government. How much power do we delegate to government? What, only enough to do the duties that we have already said that we want them to do. All the rest of the power we keep to ourselves. We are supposed to be powerful here. I look at this. We, the people, are free and sovereign with individual rights. Government is subordinate to us. It has duties. By the way, under this framework, the government never has rights against the people, right? In fact, properly understood under this framework, we are never supposed to be scared of our own government. In fact, the corollary is true. Government is supposed to be scared of us.
Yes.
Supposed to be. And so we got it ass backwards these days, don't you think?
Right.
So all I'm saying is this. I look at this framework, and I think, this is brilliant. This is profound. This is sublime. We should try that in this country. I totally think it would work. And I'm not even joking. We should try that in this country. And it would be brilliant because it would understand that in the private realm, we the people are sacrificed with our rights. But it doesn't stop there. Our civil libertarian sisters and brothers who only focus on rights and individual rights and liberties, they forget that there's also a public component. There's a communitarian ethos even to this document, right? It's not just about civil liberties and civil rights. It's also a profound understanding of the interchange between rights and duties and we the people. It's brilliant. It's beautiful. And before I go 1 second further waxing poetic about how brilliant this Constitution is, time out. Somebody tell me in what year the U.S. Constitution is either originally drafted or ratified. I'll take either year. 1789 is the ratification and the drafting? 87. Boy, you Mainers are a good lot. At least the peace action Mainers are a particularly exceptional breed. 1787 and 1789, this document gets drafted and ratified. So why did I say time out before I say anything positive about the Constitution again? Let's do one at a time. We'll do it shout-out style. Let's actually define what it took to be legally a person in this country, right? Who were actually people? Literally. Who was a legal
Property
person?
owners.
All right, hold on. One at a time. Property owners. You had to own property. Somebody else say another word. Man. You had to be a man.
White.
You had to be white. There's more.
Age or something?
There was age. You had to be old enough. You had to be in the right religion.
Right. And you couldn't be a bastard either.
You couldn't be a bastard either. So actually, honestly, that would keep me out. That's true. I mean, I was born out of wedlock, and you know what? I'm not embarrassed about it either. My mom is a beautiful woman. She's a loving woman. And that little Helio called marriage does not take a thing away from how beautiful and loving she was, or what a good job she did raising a feminist son.
Yes.
But back then, there's a whole bunch of reasons why I wouldn't have been legally a person. I'm a bastard under law, and I didn't have it. Like, I know I've actually done the research. I would not have been a legal person. And probably nobody in this room was. So, white men, don't get all like, well, at least I snuck in. Probably not. Probably not. Right? Because the reality is the founding of this country is a founding violence. Right? It's a founding violence, obviously, against the indigenous people who were already here, the human beings that were here, that were subject to intentional, deliberate genocide. Like, as in, on purpose. That is a psychic violence that we have not grappled with as a people to this day. By the way, something called the honor tax, if any of you want to hear about, ask me about the honor tax and our effort in my local community to start to actually address that. But it's also a founding violence, obviously, against the African human beings who were brought at the barrel of a gun or the point of a spear, right? A founding violence against them. It's a founding violence against women, right? Women were not people, right? Women could not own property. You know why? You were property, right? I mean, properly understood, you were property. Women couldn't enter into contracts. And check this out. There's case law as early as into the early part of the 1800s, mid-1800s, that women and their efforts to enter into contracts to dispose of personal property were considered null and void for the same legal reason that children who enter into contracts are considered null and void. They don't have the capacity. That's the legal argument. Women did not have capacity to make up, to bind themselves. So women, another construct. Can anybody, any woman in this room even get your heads around a reality where you would be treated that way?
Yeah.
Yeah? Well, I'm sorry for that. I am. And I say this, look, I'm not saying that we have created the world around gender issues that I want to live in, right? But we've made progress. Constructs changed around that. It's also a founding violence against the white men who were here, the overwhelming majority of them. Because the overwhelming majority of them weren't actually legally persons who could assert rights under the law. So I'm going to take out the age. Right, sister? Because you pointed out age. Of the adult human population, what percentage of the adult population were legally persons?
25?
25%.
13.
13. 5. The answer is 5 to 7%. You're on a roll, brother. 5 to 7%, which is another way of saying 95 to 90, right? 93 to 95% were not legally persons, right? And I want to say something here. To have these rights under this, I don't believe that those rights actually should be understood as citizenship rights. These should be understood as human rights. There's another way to say it.
Amen.
Ready? Woo! My belly button. Right? The fact that I have a belly button and you have a belly button means that you have human rights. And guess what? Rwandans and Chileans and Finnish people and Chileans have that same belly button. They're human rights. Because the Constitution does not create rights under this framework. The way it's supposed to operate, the Constitution recognizes inherent and alienable rights that existed before government is even constituted. So, some people might say, all right, Cobb, you got a scathing indictment about the founding of this country. But slavery is over, women can vote, all of it's better now. So, sit down and shut up. To which I say, au contraire, mon frere. Which is why I would say it. Because now it's time to reintroduce the corporation into this construct. Anybody know, by the way, what it takes to create a corporation today in Maine? I know the answer. $120 if you file a piece of paper. And you know what you'll get in return? The privilege, not the right, but you'll get a privilege of limited liability. You get a piece of paper that will tell you that you are now the owner of a corporation. And you know how long that corporation can last? Forever. Do you know what you can do with that corporation? Anything that is lawfully allowed. Oftentimes, things that are not lawfully allowed. Do you know what restrictions are on that corporation? Very few. All right, so that's the existing time period. Now, hold on a second. In the founding of this country, remember that the first corporations were the transnational corporations created by the sovereign, the king, the government, the ruling authority of its day, right? So, for the first 75 years of this country, do you know what it took to create a corporation? Here it goes. First, you had to get a bill introduced in the lower house. It had to pass by a majority. Then it had to go to the upper house. It had to pass by a majority. Then the governor had to sign it. It was the functional equivalent of a law. So that's how powerful and how potent it was to think about just incorporating at all. And check this out. As an incorporator, you had to prove that there is a public need that is not currently being met by either private business or by government, and that your corporation would meet that public need. And then the state legislature, before they would do it, said, okay, we will give you this corporation, but we're going to specifically say what you can and can't do, and it's only going to last for 10 years, and it can only be small, and you have to promise to always act in the public interest. And if you ever act outside the public interest, if you ever harm the body politic, if you act contrary to the public interest, your corporate charter can be revoked. Bam! The corporate death penalty. And in fact, corporate charter revocation proceedings were quite common in the first 75 years. So folks,
survive those?
I'm sorry?
Can we revive those?
Yeah, it's just a matter of political will. Watch this. Constructs. If we all start to act like it, yes, we can. Hey, I like that. Yes, we can. So hold on, because I'm almost through with this. If it's true that a corporation is issued by state government, and if it's true that that charter that comes from the state government actually can describe and make the corporation accountable, and it can be revoked if it acts outside the public interest, and it always has to act in the public interest, and the charter says what it can or can't do, can everybody say, like, if I'm right about this line being so important, and I am, if this is important, then where should the corporation be? Why, here, of course. You got that, Jeffrey?
I do.
The corporation must be on this side of the line. So, folks, when judges say no, we're going to say that a corporation is a person with constitutional rights, it perverts the entire framework of a constitutional republic. Corporate personhood is not just an interesting legal theory. Corporate personhood is not just sort of a bad idea. Corporate personhood is a linchpin for how the transnational corporations have hijacked our government. They have hijacked our culture. They have hijacked every single damn thing about our world. And the Supreme Court facilitated it, and we went along with it. Right? So when I say that corporate personhood, I genuinely believe is an odious legal doctrine, that if we're going to take ourselves seriously as a movement, you know, as seriously as the American revolutionaries, or the abolitionists, or the women's suffrage movement, or the trade union movement, if we mean what we say about the kind of movement and the world that we want to believe, be part of, and live in, we've got to address this court-created doctrine of corporate personhood.
Which is anti-constitutional.
It is unconstitutional. No. I used to say unconstitutional, but I like it better, sister. It's anti-constitutional. It is not just against it. It is fundamentally opposed. You cannot have one without the other. Sort of like, and here's another one, you can't have capitalism and democracy.
That's right.
How about that? I mean, the number, like, but here's the other thing. When you peel away a method of the layers of the onion, at least for me, now that I've seen it with clarity, there are some people who are like, oh my God, it's too big. Honestly, folks, now that I actually feel like I see the intersections of race and gender and class, and as a lawyer I see how the legal system is being used to legitimize the kind of oppression, I'm like, oh my God, yes! Because what this shows me is the way out. Right? I mean, it totally does. And it shows me that not only the intersections of race, gender, and class, but the legal system and how it's used to define it. And I got to say, to my sister Serena Harmon, a big thank you, because I had the good fortune, you know, I used to be, like, I grew up in poverty. I'm not saying that to get a pat on the head, but this is how I see the world, right? And so I used to be one of those white people working for social change who would think to myself, I never said it out loud because I was smart. I knew you couldn't say this out loud, but I used to think, man, I wish that women and people of color would kind of get over it. You know? Because really the problem is capitalism and the class system. Like, that's how the ruling elite are really, that's how they really got their boot on our neck. You know, race and gender, like, that's not, the elites don't really care. And I never would say that out loud, but Serena Harmon was a woman of color who I was really very close to, and I developed a love relationship, like a trust relationship. And so I was willing in a moment to tell her the truth about, like, to say that out loud. And I'll never forget, because Serena Harmon looked at me, and she looked at me with such love in her eyes. She really did. Absolute love in her eyes. And she said, David, I wish you could hear the words. Because I know what words you're saying and what you think is coming out of your mouth. But I wish you could hear the words that are in my ear. Because it goes like this. You're saying identity politics is preventing us from winning. You're saying, you know, we would just understand that class is the thing that was really preventing us from winning, and if we'd all focus on class, we could win. That's what you're saying. Here's what I'm hearing. Serena, you stupid bitch, you don't even understand reality. You don't even understand how the world operates. You don't matter. Your perspective doesn't matter. David, has it ever occurred to you that the reason that you think class is the end-all, be-all is because that's your reality, and maybe my reality matters, and that the way I see the world actually matters? And I swear to God, pow, that conversation, it swirled around me. I had a full-on paradigm shift at that moment, and I'm not looking for a pat on the head. I'm just telling you, like Paul on the road to Damascus, I got it. It's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I am sorry, Serena, and to every woman or person of color who I've ever been a dumbass white man to, I'm sorry, because now I get it. It is the intersections of oppression. And if there is ever anything that claims to legitimize oppression, I'm against that shit. Whether it's race or gender or sexual orientation or a class structure, if we are not against all oppression, we are really against no oppression. Right? So that I think is what the intersection, and white people, would you please start talking about race? I mean, I'm so sick and tired of people of color always having to be the ones to talk about race. Men, would you start talking about sexism, please? I am so sick and tired of women having to always be the ones to call male supremacy or gender unfairness. Straight people, would you stop calling homophobia, right? It is not fair to have gay, lesbian, transgendered, or intersex people always have to be the one to stand up and call that either. Like, frankly, that straight white men, especially if you have economic privilege, you got a lot of work to do. We got a lot of work to do. I got a lot of work to do. And I'm not saying it to get a pat on the head from women or people of color. I'm saying that's the work. And I'm saying it because if you want to win this world, you got to be serious. You got to be serious about all of the oppressions, and you got to be serious about the legal system. Because the legal system is not designed to create or administer justice. Right. Another big lie. The current legal system is designed to protect the interest of the ruling class and the wealthy elite, and they legitimize the oppression, and they make it lawful.
Tell it.
Right? So when I say I'm a revolutionary, I ain't joking. That's not an applause line. I'm a revolutionary because I want to live in a world that we will end war as foreign policy. Yes. I want to live in a world where all the children have enough to eat, and where the rivers and the streams have inherent rights that are protected and are nurtured, so that 7 generations from now there's still a earth worth having human beings participate in. Like, these are not just words to me. I want to live that.
Add the other species, please. Don't just make it human.
That's what I was talking about, the rights of nature. Like, because you know what? Beavers and grizzly bears and fish and you know what? And when we can really get our head around it, forests too. Whole ecosystems.
And the ocean.
Hello, Gaia.
The ocean.
The ocean. Oh. Right? So here's the thing. I'm going to conclude it here with this notion. You know, the Citizens United case, where the Supreme Court recently said that the anemic, pathetic campaign finance laws afforded to us by McCain-Feingold, that they said, check this out, read the opinion. It treats McCain-Feingold treats corporations like an oppressed minority. An oppressed minority. And therefore we have to overrule this decision because it's violating the rights of corporations to participate in elections. By the way, $5 billion with a D were spent in the last election cycle, and that wasn't enough. So now, if you think it's bad, watch. Corporate money can come pouring in. This court has literally legalized campaign bribery. Corporate bribery is now legal in this country. And so the question is, what are we going to do about it? I think that we use every tool in the toolbox. Yes, we support publicly funded elections. Yes, we support instant runoff voting. Yes, we're going to do everything that we can legislatively. But remember that legislatively, like the McCain-Feingold law, can be overturned in court as long as corporate personhood is allowed to stand. If we're going to be serious, we've got to also, not either or. I'm not saying stop your good work on protecting water, or stop your good work on peace, or stop your good work for publicly financed elections. I'm saying, and understand that we've got to be about a legal system and a constitutional framework that has been hijacked from us. We have to make the promise of a democratic republic a reality. And yes, we can. Si se puede. Change we can believe in would be a constitutional amendment. Peace.